afternoon. Very nice to be with you. It's been an amazing conference so far. We're just getting warmed up. I'm going to be asking the $64 question. Is consciousness the ultimate reality? Is it the unified field, glimpsed today by superstring theory? And to really address that question, we need to remind ourselves a little bit more about what do we mean by consciousness? What do we mean by the unified field? And I'm going to take those questions in the opposite order. The unified field is the culmination, you could say, of centuries of scientific investigation into the nature of reality. And this one very simple chart summarizes everything we know about the universe. And although the details may look complex, the overall structure is pretty simple. It shows the universe fundamentally unified and superficially diversified. So physics has been about exploring deeper and deeper levels of reality. And that inward exploration of the structure of physical reality began with hundreds of years of Newtonian physics. It actually began long before. But that's the domain we call classical physics, physics that explores the macroscopic sensory world of day-to-day perceptions. That understanding of the universe wasn't good enough. It does not work, for example, to understand the atom at all. So a whole new language, a whole new logic, a whole new mathematics had to be developed to properly characterize and understand the behavior of atoms and molecules. And that is quantum mechanics, which we've heard a bit about in the conference already. The quantum mechanical world of atoms and molecules, not just smaller, but completely different, radically different than classical objects. Midway through the 20th century, there was a complete reformulation of quantum mechanics to what is called quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is yet a newer language of nature, subtler, more profound, necessary to understand the world of elementary particles, more fundamental than atoms. They behave differently, partly because this is a relativistic world, a world of fast-moving particles, close to the speed of light, and early quantum mechanics was not compatible with Einstein's relativity. This is a beautiful theory, seemingly infinitely accurate as far as experiments can tell. It's very profound. It sheds light on some of the puzzles of earlier quantum mechanics, particularly the relationship between particle and field, particle and wave. But we're not going to spend much time on it today because the smart money, certainly the attention of the theoretical community, has moved on to unified quantum field theories, initially based on supergravity theory, and then the more successful superstring theory and M theory. These theories are extraordinary. They fulfill Einstein's lifelong quest to discover the unified source of the diversified universe, the fountainhead of nature's intelligence, the origin of all the streams of the laws of nature that govern the universe at every level. And the mathematics of these theories are not just beautiful, because you could say that was probably true even of quantum field theory, but are staggering, mind-blowing, unbelievable, and physicists like me aren't particularly fond of mathematics. That's why we're physicists and not mathematicians. But this absolutely blows your mind. And we're not going to talk about that either. But we are going to get a little bit of a feeling for the unified field by looking at its basic structure. Unified field is an ocean of pure existence, an ocean of pure abstract intelligence at the basis of the universe. Universal intelligence. But this ocean of intelligence isn't dead. It's not lifeless. It's not inert. Due to the quantum principle or uncertainty principle, it is teeming with unmanifest energy. It is shimmering, reverberating within itself. And in fact, so incredibly dynamic, so infinitely energetic, that it's erupting and boiling within itself. And in the process of this dynamical self-interaction, this boiling of the absolute, it erupts in a foam of effervescent bubbles, like ginger ale effervesces bubbles. By the way, it's called vacuum energy, zero-point energy, or dark energy today. It may not surprise you to learn that these bubbles aren't ginger ale, actually. They're actually infinitesimal elastic loops called superstrings. And it's amazing that the universe boils down to a sea of rubber bands. But a rubber band is actually an interesting thing, lives an interesting internal life, relatively speaking, relative to a particle, that is. Because the earlier concept of a particle, particles can't do anything except move. You can throw a particle and it'll go from A to B, but that's all they do. In comparison, the life of a rubber band is more interesting because you can throw a rubber band and it will also move, but they vibrate within themselves. And if you're a particular type of mathematical physicist, you can count the different ways a rubber band can vibrate, to the left and to the right, and longitudinally and laterally and transverse. And these superstrings actually live in 10 space-time dimensions, including one of time. And 9 spatial dimensions gives you a lot of wiggle room in which to wiggle. So there are lots of different ways these rubber bands can vibrate, but when you do the math and you calculate those different frequencies, each vibrational state has a different energy, a different frequency, represents a different tone. And when you count those different tones or frequencies of vibration of this universal intelligence, those frequencies, which mean those energies, which means those masses, because energy and mass are interchangeable concepts in relativity theory, those different masses correspond to the known particles of nature. So in the early days, we had the idea that there was a graviton, a field of gravity. There's a photon, particle of light. There are particles that have to do with the nuclear force and the radioactive force. And then there are the particles like the electron and the quarks and the neutrinos and such. It was rather a hodgepodge and arbitrary world, quantum field theory. But superstring theory explains all those particles as the inevitable, predicted consequence of the unified field in its natural states of vibration. That the so-called material universe isn't material at all. It's just the vibrational tones, the natural reverberant frequencies, the music of the absolute. So it's one theory, one universal field that supports different waves of vibration, like an ocean, supporting smaller waves and higher frequency waves and slower, lazy waves, representing different energies, different mass particles. So in a sense, it's extraordinary that one relatively simple concept of a quantum rubber band, or more precisely, a universal ocean of intelligence, of being that percolates rubber bands, that one concept explains the details of our universe. So the picture's really more like this. You have this universal entity, this abstract, unmanifest, silent ocean in waves of vibration, rising in waves of vibration that appear as the universe, and all of the ingredients that we see in the universe as just striking the different tones of the unified field. Okay, one more point before we end the physics lesson and come back to consciousness. In addition to these superstrings that percolate from this ocean of pure intelligence, pure existence, pure being, the unified field also has the incredible capacity, incredible capability of percolating entire universes. And these universes begin as baby universes, infinitesimal bubbles. But lots of them, like ginger ale. About 10 to the 144th bubbles per cubic centimeter per second. That's a lot of baby universes, and most of them are duds. Most of them pop, they disappear in a burst of energy, but under the right circumstances, some, like our own universe, start to grow exponentially. It's called inflation and spawn galaxies, like our own Milky Way galaxy and billions of others, and each galaxy, like our Milky Way galaxy, with hundreds of billions of suns, many, most with planets, perhaps many of those planets teeming with life, as is our own. So I just wanted to mention that to give a taste, at least, of the immense intelligence of the universe in this universal ocean of being, ocean of intelligence, at the basis of it all, that governs not only Earth with its 7 million mutually interacting species in this intricate web of mutual interdependence and mutual nourishment, but billions of planets in our own Milky Way galaxy and billions of universes that probably, as of recent measurements, are probably an infinite number of galaxies. Huge. That's a little bit about nature's organizing intelligence. What about our intelligence? What about consciousness? Well, the concept of meditation sheds light, sort of new light, I think, on what consciousness is. And meditation, classically understood in the yogic sense that gave birth, for example, to the Buddha and the techniques taught by Shankara and so forth, was about leading the mind effortlessly within, taking the outwardly directed active mind, typically directed outward through the senses, and turning that attention powerfully within to experience deeper and deeper levels of mind, quieter and quieter levels of the thinking process, slipping beyond thought altogether to experience pure being, pure consciousness, purely consciousness. Consciousness beyond thought, beyond sensation, beyond the intellect, beyond emotion, pure, abstract, unbounded awareness. Then, according to the Yoga Sutras, according to the first verse and the second verse of the Yoga Sutras, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga, experience of unity, the non-dual consciousness, is the complete settling of the activity of the mind. Then the seer is established in the self. And it's interesting that Patanjali describes consciousness as the self, because we might think of ourselves as something quite different, something 6 feet tall, something 4 or 5 feet wide, something this or that, something to do with beliefs, gender, race, religion. But according to yoga and Patanjali's, the self is the seer within, the field of consciousness, the non-changing, the immortal, the unbounded, the knower. We all have a knower, or we wouldn't be knowing, seeing. But we are different from the seeing, different from the knowing. We are consciousness, our own subjectivity. And this experience of pure consciousness is a fourth state of consciousness, the meditative state, Samadhi. In the literature of yoga, there's the expression, the peaceful, the blissful, the undivided, non-dual, is thought to be the fourth. That is the self. That is to be known. It is not just a state of subjective experience. It has, in the brain, its corresponding measurable correlates. At every level of the settling of the mind, the electrical activity of the brain, the firing of the neurons in the brain looks completely different. Outwardly directed activity, active mind, concentration, focusing, quieter levels of self-reflection, as in, for example, what's called open monitoring, the scientific literature, but a self-reflective, self-observing, vipassana style meditation or mindfulness is generally in this category, completely different style of functioning of the brain. going beyond thought completely, now having nothing to do with thought, no mind, no intellect, but pure, unbounded, universal, abstract awareness. Pure existence has its own completely unique style of brain functioning. The meditative state is characterized by not just the frequency, which is alpha 1, but the uniform or synchronous firing across the total brain. And that's, from a brain standpoint, amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Because normally the brain is not that coherent, in case you can't tell. In waking consciousness, even sitting restfully with the eyes closed, if you look at the electrodes on the scalp as you measure the electrical activity of the brain in waking consciousness, there's not a great deal of coherence or communication or correlation between different parts of the brain. Some neighboring parts of the brain are talking to each other, but mostly the brain is functioning in a rather asynchronous and chaotic way. This is the same subject. Learn to meditate 3 months later in the meditative state, and you see something you don't see in hypnosis, waking, dreaming, sleeping, or drug-induced states. You see the whole brain functioning in a completely synchronous, coherent way. That is one of the signatures of a new state of consciousness. Fourth state of consciousness, Samadhi, the meditative state. Now, in addition to simply being interesting, for practical purposes, orderly brain functioning is a good thing. It correlates with intelligence, and creativity, and learning ability, and moral reasoning, ego development, psychological stability, and emotional maturity. Everything good about the brain depends on its orderly functioning. And when people experience Samadhi regularly, you see marked improvements in every measure of human intelligence, highly significant improvements, which suggests that transcending is good for you. It's also very good for the health, but I won't go into that. Something real is happening, something very different is happening, something rather radical is going on in the meditative state of Samadhi. But back to the first question, what is the relationship between that inner experience of unbounded awareness when the mind, the intellect, is temporarily left behind? Because transcending can be a rather fleeting experience, as the Rosicrucians like to say, one split second in eternity. It's a holy shit experience. Oh my God, what was that? It's radical, but it's universal, and it's unbounded, and it's infinite. But what is the relationship between that field of intelligence within, at the basis of thought, and the intelligence at the basis of the universe? Our Atma, our self, the observer, the seer within, and Brahman, the unified source of the entire universe. A physicist might at first say, forget it. How could there be a relationship? Because this is purely subjective, and that is purely objective, material stuff. But at this conference, we probably know by now that quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, and the unified field are non-material realities. Absolutely non-material. It's not a material source of the material universe. It's a non-material source and pure potential, pure intelligence. And intelligence is a perfectly fair word because the deeper you go into nature and the more you explore the laws of nature, for example, at the level of electromagnetism, at the level of the Nobel Prize-winning electroweak unified theory, grand unified theories, and super unified theories, the more concentrated the intelligence becomes. And the very simple mathematical formula that describes the structure and functioning of unity contains within that compact form all the intelligence, all the laws of nature governing life at every level. Maxwell's equations and quantum chromodynamics and the electroweak theory and theory of general relativity, all of that is found in most concentrated form here. So the unified field is the most concentrated field of intelligence in nature, and dynamic intelligence. And dynamic intelligence is consciousness. And you can take that sort of qualitative relationship or discussion quite far. And philosophers of science would love this dialogue. For a quantitative physicist or quantitative scientist, anything that could be related to semantics is not well trusted. So I'm going to touch upon arguments that you can sink your quantitative teeth into to establish the identity of our own inner intelligence and the intelligence at the basis of the universe. And I'll do this very quickly, but if we tape it, if you're interested, you could go back and try to make sense out of it. Quantitative correspondence between pure consciousness and the unified field. Let's look at them quantitatively. And what does that mean? Well, we have a unified field, but we also have its structure of vibrations, its calculable frequencies. And these fundamental frequencies, the natural reverberant tones of the unified field, just dial it down just a tiny bit. Those frequencies of the unified field are the elementary particles and forces of nature. That's all they are. They're just the fundamental reverberant frequencies of unity. And we know what they are. This is the spin 2 graviton, responsible for gravity. The spin 1 forces like electromagnetism, the nuclear force. The spin 1/2 particles like electrons and quarks. The spin 0 Higgs, which has finally been seen. All of these different vibrational tones of the unified field are well mapped, well known, and calculable. But what about consciousness? What emerges from the abstract field of consciousness is thought, physiology, matter. When the awareness settles in, all of that dissolves into pure being. But getting familiar with the process of emergence and submergence, and emergence and convergence, and emergence and submergence, you're familiar with the fundamental tones, the vibrations or waves of consciousness rising from pure silence into activity. And you can enumerate those waves, the fundamental frequencies of consciousness. And initially there are three, as the pure knowledge, pure knower, pure consciousness is seen as the knower, but also that which is known, the object, and the dynamic relationship between the two. That is Satchidananda, that is the Holy Trinity, that's the three-in-one structure of unity. But the moment you have three, you automatically have the relationships among those three. And the number of relationships, well, skipping the mathematics and the group theory, there emerge really a total of 8 entities from the three, including something that you can call in the Vedic literature Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which means pertaining to ego, pertaining to intellect, pertaining to mind. And then the 5 fundamental elements, akasha, etc. You say, well, that's kind of a coincidence that you get this 3-in-1 emergence of this from the ocean of unity, both from the self and from the super.